What I'm going to do is, the things I'm going to talk about, the things that Chip talked about are fairly similar, with the exception I'm not going to talk about the chicken business much. But I'm going to talk about the beef genetics business for about the next maybe 15 minutes, and a little bit about what they do here. Chip did a fabulous commercial for the sale tomorrow. Chip, was it paying you for that?
Not nearly enough.
It was really good. I can't do any better than that. I appreciate it. But I think you know, the folks here at Bred for Balance, I think their focus on the future is probably as intense as anybody in the genetics business that we work with. And that's important to us. It's been important that when I started the allied business, that's what I had in mind. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. Because though we can't predict exactly what the future is going to be, we need to use all the information we can and all the risk management tools we can, so based on facts, so that we can make wiser decisions. Because we're not ever going to make 100% of the right decisions, but if we make better than average decisions, most of the time, we'll end up being where we want to be in the genetics business. So if I had a crystal ball, and I talk about my crystal ball a lot, but I don't really necessarily have one. I think quality use of a crystal ball, even by a soothsayer, takes into account logical things. That's how they get it right. I'm not sure they got a crystal ball, but logical things happen. If you're 7 foot tall, they say, I see children playing basketball. Oh, my kids play basketball. It's just making good decisions more often. And my crystal ball says that in this business, in the larger beef business, that information is going to be more readily available and is more readily available to the folks you work with, and yourself too, and the folks you work with than it's ever been before. And Chip outlined an example of that information transfer, that more people know what you do at the farm and ranch and what cattle you produce and the value of those cattle than they ever have before. And if you think that's going to go the other way, I think we're crazy. I think that's a crazy assumption to think it's going to go the other way, because we know more about everything. We know more about everything in our society than we've ever known. Sometimes that's good, sometimes I don't know. But so my crystal ball says there's going to be more available information every day from this day forward, because we've got the technology to do it. My crystal ball also says that we're going to be more accountable than we've ever been. And part of that accountability comes from the increased information. Again, if more people know what we do, then we're more accountable for the things we do. That's not rocket science. Chip just told you, and I believe it, that there's going to be more price differentiation up and more price differentiation down for the raw materials that the commercial cattle producers of this nation produce than there's ever been. Just foreshadowing that, I think when Clint gives his presentation, Clint Berry that works with us, gives his presentation summarizing the superior livestock data from this year, he says in most weight classes there were nearly $20 of differentiation between the high selling lots and the low selling lots at every sale. The average was in the middle, 10 plus and 10 minus, and that has never been that high. Some of that's due to genetics, some of that's due to process, just like Chip told you, but I think in the future, and it makes good sense. If you sell a better product, you should be paid more. And if you sell a poorer product, you should be paid less. That's the American way for doing everything. And I think the last thing on my crystal ball, and this may be on your radar screen or may not, but we are going to deal with a more competitive world beef market, whether we like it or not. Our markets are open to everybody. Their markets are open to us sometimes. And if we don't at least think along that lines and think along the lines of we're not the only people that produce beef, it gives us some incentive to do a better job. So this was part of my presentation last year. And again, if you try to back up some of the assumptions I'm going to make in the next couple slides, there's the beef genetics business, there is not one short-term decision. Some of you think that the bull buying decision tomorrow is a short-term decision. I'm going to buy lot 6. Why? Because I like lot 6. That's a short-term decision. But in fact, lot 6, or lot 12, or lot 99 is going to impact your beef business for a very, very long time. That decision has a huge amount of gravity, because he's going to breed females this year. First calves are going to be born next year. First daughters are going to be bred the following year. before he has any daughters, calving your herd, it's going to be about 2021. Before you even see the first daughter have a calf of the bull you buy tomorrow, or bulls you buy tomorrow. And if those bulls last 5 years like they should, or 6 years like they should, you're still going to be getting calves out of those bulls in 2023, maybe 2024. If you're like my friend Ken Dishorst in Missouri, maybe 2030. Keep telling him you're not a very good bull buyer. Your average bull, he says, they last 10 or 11. I said, that's not good. That's not good. So, again, based on the decisions you make tomorrow, in 2033, your 10-year-old cows will still be sired by those bulls, or could still be sired by those bulls. That has immense long-term ramifications. There is no short-term decisions. And so your seed stock producer better not be making short-term decisions either. Because if I do the other slide and show you that and back it up 5 more years and add it pretty soon we're to 2040, based on the decisions that they're making on which cows to flush, what technology to use, what matings to make bulls for 2 and 3 years from now. So, if you'll buy that, if you'll buy my assertion that genetic decisions have such long-term implications, how can we reduce the risk with that kind of decision? I mean, we'd like to reduce the risk for decisions for next year. And we do that. When we buy a bull that we're very confident is going to be a Japanese bull, we're trying to reduce our risk of making a bad decision for next year. But with all the things that Chip talked about and all the things that we know are important, maternal traits on down the line, everything, how do we reduce that risk of improve the probability of making a better decision tomorrow instead of a poor decision? You've already made one good decision. In my mind, you've already made one good decision. And that is, and this is true for our business, I'll reiterate that just a little bit, but source, genetic source, is and will be everything in the future. Random genetic source, swapping genetic sources every year and doing those kind of things based on who had the prettiest pictures this year, the prettiest pictures next year, those days are coming to an end. Because once you've made a good choice of source, you've reduced the amount of risk associated with every other choice that you're going to make. Because your choice of genetic source will either guarantee your improvement or it'll guarantee that you're not going to make any improvement. Regardless, if you buy the first bull in the ring or the last bull in the ring, it's going to guarantee one or maybe guarantee the other. Does that source, do they talk about the future? Do they have a plan? Are the cows that they're getting ready to flush now to make bulls for you 2 or 3 years from now, or their next generation of donors 2 or 3 years from now, backed up to bulls 2 or 3 more years, are they still going to have value in 2030s and 40s? So your seed stock source needs to be talking about the 2030s and 40s and not be talking about some of the frivolous things that we spend our time talking about in the seed stock business sometimes. Because we're asking you to make a long-term decision, we have to be thinking long-term too. So evaluate the program, evaluate the plan that the program has, and evaluate their commitment to you long-term and what their plan is to be in the seed stock business, and make sure that you like all those things. Because when you go out and look at the cow herd, or you go look at the calving barn, if the maternity chains are rusty, that's good. And if they're shiny, it's not as good. Evaluate the program. Because whatever the old cows are here, whatever the 6, 8, 10, 12, 14-year-old cows are here, that's what your cow herd is going to look like 10 or 15 years from now if you continue to use this program. If you like what you see, and you like the results that they get, the weights that they get, the carcass traits that they get, you'll like where you're headed. You're headed in a positive direction. Does your seed stock source embrace technology? This is becoming the line in the sand. These folks embrace technology. These folks reject technology. And whether they know it or not, the decision is being made of whether you're going to be in the real beef genetics business for the future. Because if you're rejecting the technology, you've already lost, or you're in the process of losing, and just don't know it yet. And never, ever opt for below average. I don't know what we're thinking. Would anybody in this room plant below average seed corn? Well, this is below average seed corn, but you're really going to like how the plants look. That's nice. It'll yield. But your neighbors will say really nice things about it. Nobody would plant below average seed. Nobody would plant below average lima beans or strawberries or what. Nobody. And yet in this business, from time to time we plant. I know people that plant below average every year. And I don't get it. And they steal money from the beef business. And they shouldn't be doing that. They're selling seed stock and they shouldn't be doing that. Never settle for below average. Again, because if you believe my premise that it's a 15-year decision, then you're not just going to have one bad corn crop. You plant below average seed corn 1 year, that's one thing. But you're planting below average seed for the next 15 years. No one would do that logically. Nobody. And I already kind of addressed this a little bit, but seriously? Below average genetics? So how do you know if the genetics that you're purchasing are below average or above average? How do you know? The very best way, and it's not even close, is to evaluate their EPDs. You know why that is? Because it's the only way that you can evaluate genetic value across herds. It is the only way. Raw weights, weaning weights, throw them out. Birth weights, throw them out. No value. Particularly, if I look at these weaning weights and I look at the weaning weights halfway across the state and try to compare them, that's old stuff. That is old, that's no value anymore. Because what EPDs do is, and I get this all the time, well, that EPDs, that's a lot of, that's complicated. That's not complicated. What the breed association or whoever's doing the genetic evaluation did was they asked every single producer all over this country, how did you like the calves out of that bull? And then they take all that information and they put it together and say, well, 75% of the people said these genetics grew really fast. And only 25 said they were average or below. Or 80% of the people said the cows sired by this bull were awful. And 20% said they were okay. And then they summarize that information, just like they ask everybody how the calves were. They summarize that information, and the summary is EPDs. So if 1,000 people use that AI sire, and he calved easy, 90% plus of the time, he's going to have a great calving easy EPD. And if he calved hard, he's going to have a terrible one. It's just like asking everybody whether or not they were satisfied with the calves and why. It's not. There's no magic in that. It's just a summary of all the data that's ever turned in. It's got to be third-party verified. See, more and more folks just, this is our way of genetically evaluating the cattle. Well, who watches the store? Well, nobody. Take our word for it. We collect our own data, we do our own evaluation, and then come with us. Doesn't make any sense. Make sure your data is third-party verified. Your EPDs are third-party verified. Next step is to make sure that your source is committed to collecting quality data. Because if they're not, their EPDs are not as good as the folks that are. They've got to be committed to collecting quality. As I said, that raw weights weren't important. They're not important to you, but they are important that they're collected correctly and that their contemporary groups are done correctly, so that their EPDs are better than those that aren't turning in complete and correct data. DNA technology is going to change our lives, slowly, but it's going to change our lives. It's in the medical field, it's changing people's lives a lot faster. But DNA technology is giving us a chance to take what we already know, take the summary of all that information that was turned in on whether the cattle performed well, marbled well, whatever it was, and it's adding an extra level of reliability. And that's why these folks here are using DNA technology to add reliability to the good data that they're collecting and the good EPDs that they're putting together. And then if you really want to simplify your life, and you don't like looking through all the information, grab a hold of those index EPDs and just use them like nice guardrails. Keep you out of the mud. Make sure that your profit calculator data is good. Make sure that your cows, if you're selecting for cattle with relatively high APIs, you're pretty much guaranteeing that your cow herd's moving forward. Now you can go in and customize that however you want to, but again, it'll keep you out of the ditch by using those trades and using that information to select for profit versus one trade at a time kind of thing. Because here's the worst case scenario. My first slide said more information, greater accountability, more price differentiation, and more competitive world beef market. And if you're making genetic decisions that are below average for accountability, and below average for price differentiation like the feeder profit calculator, and below average to fight in a more competitive world beef market, then I don't get it. Then I don't get it, because there's no chance for us to be successful as an industry if we continue to even accept below average for any of those things. Because we're in the service business, I'm no softer on below average service. Anytime you're dealing with less than professional bull development, anytime the last pen of bulls should have been steers, anytime that you're worried about data being misrepresented, photos being misrepresented, videos being misrepresented, go away, go do something else. Anytime that the warranty, I like the word unfriendly warranty. Like buying a used car when I was a kid. Sometimes you could get an unfriendly warranty. Or non-existent warranty. I know people that still buy bulls from places that don't have any warranty on the bulls. You wouldn't buy one thing. You wouldn't buy one thing at Walmart or a vehicle or a truck. You wouldn't buy one thing without a warranty. And yet, you know, he doesn't have a warranty on those bulls, but those are really nice bulls. Well, that's illogical. No one would do that. No plan for long term is just as much below average service as poor bull development is. And I believe that, and that's why we work with the herds that we work with. And any seed stock source that would discourage use of EPDs, discourage the use of technology, or discourage crossbreeding does not have your best interest in mind. And that is poor customer service as much as it is negligence. Poor customer service. Because they don't care about your success. They only care about their own success. So choose wisely. I'm going to say choose wisely because you come here. Reputation source, plan for the future, commitment to technology. Because remember, again, wherever your seed stock source is going, you're going too. Like it or not, whatever decisions they're making now are going to impact what you do for the next 15 to 20 years if you continue to use this source for genetics. Because we're going to have an upgraded industry. It already is, just like everything else, uses more information and presentation of value. And again, that follows up what Chip had to say. And again, source is the biggest decision you make. And at Allied, when we chose the herds that we worked with, is the biggest decision that we made too. And why our business has been successful is because we chose to work with sources who believed in the things that I talked about here. I don't have to go over this slide, it's just a summary of everything else, but we're glad you're here. See all of you tomorrow, hopefully, and we'll fill this place up and have a good sale tomorrow. Tom and Jim, thanks. We're ready for some questions. If I have questions for Chip, what I said probably doesn't deserve a lot of questions, but Chip stuff's neat. We're going to use it a lot because we know if we're going to present some differences in value, we've got to have a third-party verified way of doing that. And a way of showing customers downstream that there is difference in feeder cattle, although we can predict differences in feeder cattle that those folks know already exist. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty. You know, I had one thought back to Chip's comment. You know, when my wife has something for sale, she wants to advertise on the radio, and she don't think it's worth much, I say, don't say it's free, don't say it's a giveaway. You'll get more calls if you charge a little bit for it. You know, and he really emphasized how this is a free service to you. I just want to encourage you, just because it's free to you, don't be afraid to use it. We are paying for it, like you said. And you know, me and Tom, we talked about this. I don't think we ever did it, but when you look at the dollars that we spend in DNA testing and all this stuff to try to provide them EPDs, which all this is built off of, the figure gets pretty high to try to provide you with accurate data. So it's not free. So please use it. I think it's a good tool. So Who's got the first question? Shirley had to strike some thoughts here tonight. We gotta have some interaction here. Jason.
Your feed cost on the calculator there and the yardage cost, does that stay in there as a constant, or you redo that regularly, or can it be changed by the producer, or if they feel necessary, or how's that?
Great question. In case you all didn't hear, coming from somebody feeding cattle's perspective, question was, can we change some of those management economics, right, on the feeder profit calculator? Yes, we can. Gonna kind of give you the song and dance. We'll change it a couple times a year is the plan at present, kind of correlate with those major feeder marketing seasons. We'll realign those. However, and we've done a fair amount of the math to check this over and over, much like an EPD. So I'm gonna jump back to a point that Marty made. Thank you for making it. Don't use lower limits. They're meaningless numbers. Why does that matter? Well, for the same reason that these gentlemen would tell you, don't go buy bulls based on birth weights, because you know if I have the same mating in North Dakota versus Texas, my birth weight's going to look different, okay? But what you can do is look at the birth weight EPD in both of those locations, because it takes a whole host of things into account, and all of a sudden now, whether they weigh a few pounds lighter in Texas doesn't matter, because that EPD is valid, correct? Similarly here, if you go back in the tool, because it's a break-even calculator for two different groups, the reality is if I change those numbers, it really doesn't change the relative value much, right? Because I am changing them for both groups. And since I'm changing those feed costs, yardage costs for both groups, it has minimal impact. And where it would have minimal impact is if there was a distinct difference in terms of time on feed, you have the yardage and that sort of thing, the length of time, and so that cost of that added feed. And we've done this a number of times. It really has minimal value because it is actually the difference in two break-evens. Your break-even calculator that you use at your place is a more valuable tool in terms of looking at holistic management pieces. You need that tool for that purpose. But this tool is very specifically to provide that differential between these two on those issues. And so we do adjust them, but I want you to recognize that, frankly, even if we didn't, barring some episode where corn goes back to $8 or something like that, in that case, by the way, we would change it more rapidly than 2 times a year if there was some crazy influx of change. So we do change it. It has a margin. Does that make sense? Why?
Yeah.
Okay.
Question here?
In your calculator, you showed the value of the sire on those calves. In your calculator, do you ever have a value for the cow?
You nailed it. And what I didn't do here is, because for the sake of confusion, and you all can tell, it was hard enough to, most of you couldn't read what I had up there anyway. I can do maternal grandsires. We can take into account maternal grandsires, into account also how many heifers you retain on an annual basis. And so that builds a very powerful picture of the cow.
So how much does that change if you can be at $12, which is where you were on the high side? If you have grandsire information on the cow side, where can that number?
Well, it certainly refines the picture, but recognize you could go down. Having a picture doesn't necessarily mean you go up. Now, if you have built in a tremendous amount of profit potential, you're right. For those of you who can track your maternal grandsires and you've been purchasing for this period of time, you can make that thing start to push to those outer limits pretty fast. It doesn't move as near as fast as direct sires, right? Because those direct sires impact half of the herd. Whereas if I assume Sim Angus cows, what I'm doing if I don't have maternal grandsires is I'm assuming breed average for both of those. Makes sense, right? I'm using the average genetic. And so if my cow herd, even if they're better than breed average, what if they're 20%? That's going to move the needle, but not near as rapid as that direct sire selection. So that is.
How about, does it calculate in, like, if they're natural or age and source verified and stuff like that, them kind of programs on top of it or not?
So it's a great question. And for those folks who are buying in this room, you want to know those things. This tool is very specifically geared to highlight 3 specific things. Those 2 major management events and genetics, which obviously is crucial. We don't try to define every free market piece because everything we do is based in scientific literature. If we can't back it up with science, not that the free market isn't valid, but it's fickle, right? It's constantly moving. And so we can't keep up with those changes. So what we will do is we will tell you if it's NHTC qualified. You will have to determine what that changes in terms of the value to you as a potential buyer. So it's a great question, one we get fairly frequently. That would require, and it's possible, I will tell you, we have some feedlot folks who are interested in a feedlot version of this that goes to both your point and your point, and that is a real-time tool that could allow you to tie in real-time market economics of a whole host of things. And so we're in discussions with some of those people at present. Again, once they start looking into it, what they actually find, some see interest in going farther down that road, some actually start to come back towards the simplified approach because they're like, really, we have a good environmental picture. What we don't have is the genetic component, right? And so some of them get back more interested. Just boil this down to the genetic piece for me. So there's some differences there. So that's a long-winded answer to say no. It usually takes me 5 minutes just to introduce myself, so that's just kind of...
You know, I think in time as we get using this system, you know, every good feedlot does closeouts on pens and cattle and stuff, and they're gonna see where this figure was when them cattle come in, look at that closeout, and it's gonna be some fluctuation. We don't expect that to just be flat, you know, exactly the same. But in time, them feedlot guys are gonna know, you know, they're gonna start comparing that number to their closeout and the performance of them cattle. And then we'll find the right balance, them buyers will. You know, it's gonna take some using but the first thing we gotta do is get people to use it.
To Jim's point, so really, what you hear there, again, to go back to something I said before, there's a burden on everybody here, right? This sort of tool, again, very clearly, I never called it a marketing tool. It can be used that way and fairly effectively, but that's not what we refer to it as. It's very much an awareness tool, and what that means then is everybody has obligation. So some of us at the cow-calf and seed stock level, we're like, man, look at all we got to do. It costs a fortune to figure this deal out from a seed stock standpoint, and it does. It takes a tremendous amount. It takes certainly a shift in mindset for a lot of serious commercial producers to keep the level of awareness that you're going to need for these sort of tools going forward. And this is just one of a number of commercially focused tools we have at present that can even really dig in deeper on some of the awareness that commercial folks would have to have. And so it takes a bit more burden on them, and they have to do some of these things and have the courage to ride that through. But it also puts burden on the feedlot buyer, or on order buyers, folks who are buying for the feedlot, because if they want these sort of cattle, then we're going to have to find a way to meet in the middle on what we know is the feedlot side of the business, is just tell me how I bought them. If I bought them with enough margin, I'm good, right? And I get it, I understand. It's a dollars and cents business. And so how do we encourage those folks in ways that we can speak to adding value to what Marty said so that we have this greater differentiated system? And we're gonna need some of the feedlot folks to help us figure out those mechanisms so that they can justify paying more. And so what does that mean? That means the next person in the food chain is crucial, because we need them willing to ride, them meaning the packers, they have to be willing to aid that effort too, so the feedlots can go farther. And that's why, wow, this is the fun stuff talking at this level, because you all are the first ones to get this ball in motion. Simultaneous, we're having a lot of serious conversations with every level in the industry right now. Some of us had the privilege of being at NCBA last week. Anybody who's never been to an NCBA meeting, you should go once. It's an eye-opening experience. And so the conversations that we get to have in a place like that's pretty powerful. And so a lot of conversations we've been having about the feeder profit calculator for months now really got to come together, because you get everybody face to face now and you get to kind of start hammering these out. And I will give you one little example of where there's collaboration across all sectors. And so just yesterday in my email, I received a large data dump from a major packer. I wouldn't say that packer is represented in this room, but I wouldn't say they're not. So, by the way, I used to work for that packer a long time ago, back in the day, or their predecessor, IBB and Amarillo. But anyway, so a large data. Why? because they are convinced there's somewhat of a geographical situation. We're trying to help them and some feedlot owners and some seed stock and some cow-calf folks in a particular region, that they're trying to solve some concerns. And they see tools like the feeder profit calculator as a mechanism to make some transparency start to show up across the system, so that each of them can find different ways to win, so they can help sustain something in a particular region that all parties think they want. So there are steps towards this way of collaborating. I know that for many of us in the room are like, yeah, people like y'all have been standing in front of us for years telling us this kind of stuff's coming, and I don't see it. Fair enough. But I assure you, things, to Marty's point, things are moving tremendously fast. And in the same way that if you look, this thing right here, when did it start? When was the first one? 06, 07? Right? First smartphone, 06, 07. 11 or 12 years ago. It's crazy, isn't it, Mike? It feels like you've had these darn things your whole life.
Gordon's still
I
running
know.
his own
I know. We talk about that on a regular basis. And you all are using, yes, I appreciate that. It goes back to my solar flare theory. But those are just small. Well, it's not small. It's actually fairly revolutionary and earth-shattering. But these things are coming, and your youngsters know that. And I would tell you, the last thing I'll dovetail on this comment off of Marty's early point, is there's a lot of folks, and this crowd isn't this group, but we can talk in front of a lot of folks on certain occasions, and they'll say, Chip is just all mumbo jumbo, smoke and mirrors kind of nonsense. Okay, fair enough. Most of the time, those folks are a little older than I am, and so I almost always tell them first and foremost, you probably have your range paid for, cows probably paid for, you probably don't owe the bank very much. I tip my hat to you. I got nothing to say, other than the following thing. And for those in the room who might think that everything we're talking about is just nonsense, do you have an interest in handing this operation off to your kids or grandkids? Because if you do, I would just ask you sincerely to ponder, do you possibly think they can do their business the same way that you're doing yours now and be successful? And if you think they can, great. But I would ask you to seriously think about that, because again, as was said a few minutes ago, you're making decade-long decisions every time you buy a bull. And so, long ramifications. Serious stuff. We think of it as just going to a bull sale and screaming a little bit, and that's fun. We all like the dynamic of it, but it's a weighty decision.
Anything else? Right here.
How are the profit indicators weighted? Because some cattle make money on grade, some on yield, some on rate of gain, some on efficiencies.
Great question. And so, right now, ours is pretty much on a fairly static grade and yield standpoint. That is one of the primary reasons that feed yards have said, could we adjust based on what we do better, right? Some yards like to feed a certain kind of cow. Some yards think their gains, they can get a little better gain than the average. So I will tell you, this is based on the economics as they impact the industry at present in mass. And so you know then the two biggest drivers from outside of health, let's assume health is baked into the cake, right? Because we're calculating that. Can they convert and gain? Will they market? And if they'll do those things, they'll reflect fairly well. It does also reflect, it does notice cutability fairly well, which is something that, again, it goes back to your comments from earlier. If we linked this totally to the free market, she can be a fickle thing, right? And that cutability right now is not as huge a deal. Who's to say what 5 years or 2 years brings? And so we're making some of these decisions on some of these bulls, and so we want to make awareness of that. So again, it is a flat tool right now based on where the industry's at present, but there's no reason that if feedlot owners wanted to go down this road that it couldn't be customizable and let folks kind of adjust it. It's just a software piece, that's not hard to do. There was another question.
How do you see this through that the end consumer is going to go to Walmart and pay $12 for a ribeye versus $10?
Oh, so now I got to be really careful. You actually threw one of my pet peeves in there versus the other, so I'm going to try. First, it would seem to be clear that at least in the last few years, there's a strong appetite for beef, right? So even though I showed the general trend is starkly in a certain direction, last few years there's a pretty solid blip going, I think, in our favor. And so I think the consumer's telling us that they're willing to pay. We talk about some of these things in the price differential. I think some of what we're talking about actually might be more downward pressure than upside pressure. Meaning that as these sort of tools come out, and whether you jump on the profit calculator or you wait for the next train to come through and you're forced to, one or the other, I think the bigger likelihood, frankly, is that they're gonna start putting more downside pressure, and a feedlot buyer is gonna say, I don't have an outlet for that anymore. I just don't want that. Now, we hope for upside pressure, right? But I think the more likely, I think our industry has shown that to us over time, right? We all dream about the premiums, it's the discounts that make the decisions. And so my guess is we get this kind of awareness, major purveyors that handle the grocers along with the packers, they're gonna start putting more downside pressure. Will the price go up? Possibly. And that's where if we build in very specific channels, if we have collaboration across different platforms, where high value cattle that can be documented and people will pay for that, do I think there's an appetite for that? Oh, I certainly know that there is. How wide is it? Is it gonna be at Walmart? Maybe not. Will it be a more customized specialty place? Maybe so. Now I'm gonna step over to my soapbox thing just 1 second. So forgive me when I say what I'm about to say. You can hate me later. You can hate me afterwards, it's okay. Let's listen. We focus a great deal on kicking our numbers up. And I get it. We all have bills to pay. We all have ranches to pay off. My wife likes to go places nice on occasion. Get it. But all of our major competitors are finding ways to drive costs down and making their protein source more economical compared to ours. I think one of the things that we have to at least ponder, if our goal isn't more about driving our costs through the floor so we can function on a solid margin without necessarily building a model that forces our prices to continue to go through the roof. Because right now that seems to me what the industry is trying to build, that the only way we can keep this beast going is prices going through the roof. Again, I'm not an economist, I'm not a genius, but I know that there is one breed type that likes to talk about beef will become a lobster model. Some of you have heard me talk about that. I don't know about you, but how many times do you eat lobster a year? I'm not in on that model. I think that model sucks, to be really honest, to mean that we eat this on rare occasion. So I think we have to have a really hard heart-to-heart internally about how we keep prices at a level where the consumer will choose our product over some of the others. And so I think these kind of tools, indexes, what a great way to think like your banker when it comes to not only seed stock purchase decisions, but keeping costs in check. That's what an index is. It's just your banker making these decisions for you. He or she's saying, this makes money, this doesn't. I don't care about all the minutia in the middle. The big picture is it does or it doesn't. And as we can use some of those kind of things to help us keep costs in check, and there are different ways to do that, I think that's something we have to consider. So that's me taking both sides. I have little doubt that folks are going to take advantage of value added with awareness across the food chain. Consumers will pay a little bit more. But the bigger issue is how much more do we want to ask them to pay before they just quit buying? And I don't know.
You know, there's a lot of things coming in the future. I tell my boys, I mean, they're gonna do things I've never done. One thing that I thought of earlier when Chip was speaking is, it's just talk now, but we are keeping the records of the cattle that we doctor, you know, that if we can identify the genetics that stay healthier, you know, resistant to diseases, you know, because the consumers want less and less antibiotic, that's gonna become more valuable. So as we can come up with a healthy PD, they can incorporate that into that, you know, so that, you know, just think of all the things that are there. The other thing that I think my boys are gonna have to do is we measure all production off a per cow basis, and we really need to be measuring off an acre basis, you know. Find that, you know, Pioneer seed corn has not made the ear of corn any bigger in like the last 50 years. They just make it to plant heavier, you know, more kernels per acre. And so we always got to measure everything off a per cow basis. Really, we got to be measuring everything off of a per acre basis. And maybe that's going to mean a smaller cow. I mean, that's. I'm not getting too old, and I don't get involved. I mean, Travis and Tom do all the genetic part of this, and I kind of their support team. So it's getting late. Chip's gonna be around. And, you have anything else? Is there any other last burning comment? We don't wanna hold you up too late. We got a big day tomorrow. Jason, did you have anything? Jason, you got one more.
I'll ask one final question on the profit calculator. Is there a validation component to it? Because research has gone into setting it up and kind of defining the economic parameters. Is there data being collected on pen replicates and large feed yards, or is data where they've done a profit calculator to prove in the end that relative value is real? Is it generated in real feed yards, or is it just in controlled environmental studies?
So, two answers to that. One of the beauties of having this monster database is most of this stuff is stuff we can go backwards and collect, right? So from a scientific validation standpoint, that's different than a real world acceptance validation, correct? And so we have a whole host of data sets internally that we are working on at present. Some of you are familiar, like with our carcass merit program and some of those kind of things. We have this small little thing that some of you have heard of called a single-step genetic evaluation that's taking a little pressure here for a few weeks, but here soon that'll be rectified. But internally, we can do the science validation. We have the data to do that. I think maybe the big question there is from an industry acceptance standpoint. And so some of the folks in the room, one standing really close to me and some others in here, know that we are knee-deep in the middle of building our approach to help handle that piece, which is validation that the industry sees as in their wheelhouse, kind of in their version. And so science is not the concern. The fact that, again, you all trust EPDs, you trust indexes, that's why you're here. And we can go back and we're continuing to do. We've done some smaller validations and consistently look quite good. We're going to do one major thing with this carcass merit program, which will give us tremendous amount of refinement from a scientific standpoint. But we are looking at a fairly robust approach to doing the other piece, which is, as some would say, a relational piece with those in the feed yard. So we're trying to refine how that's going to look. And those conversations are ongoing and serious at present. That's a great question. One thing I didn't make clear, and I should just dovetail on, this is good for any mainstream breed of cattle. So if you're sitting in the room, you're like, man, I wish I could do this, but my cattle are Gelbies or Limflex, or I just came here for the first time and, you know, I don't hate that. That's okay. We can view almost any mainstream breed of cattle through this tool. The exception right now, and it probably doesn't impact a great deal of number of folks in Minnesota, would be the eared breeds of cattle, and it's something about the way they do their data, but they're trying, some of them in particular, are trying to rectify that, so in short order they can run through the system as well. But essentially any stream of cattle that you would have could be utilized through this.
The other thing you can do is you can run it, and if it doesn't look very good, you don't have to tell anybody. Just go home and sell all your bulls and
But that's a great point, Jim. For those of you,
you don't have to tell anybody.
for those of you who are worried that you don't want to see a bad result, I assure you, the only people who will ever see your certificate, unless you choose to share it, is you and me. And I'm too darn forgetful to remember your certificate from yours, so I really don't have time to keep that in my mind, nor will I, it's just not going to stick very long.
And I'm pretty sure that's what's going to happen. I mean, the ones that are coming public are going to be the ones that look pretty good, and the ones, there's people out there that they're not going to show. And it just hit me. I was at a meeting this fall, and I'll go back to where I started, coming where I come from, when we were pretty involved with cattle feeding. Us Wolves and the Hooks are the same way. We're open book. We don't hide nothing. So, and we created a relationship between our bulk customers, and we buy them feeder cattle, and we told them, and they're still doing it at Wolf Cattle. They get their ranchers get a report card on exactly how their cattle worked in their feeding system. And they tell them in that open communication. But I was at a meeting that Marty had this fall, and comment never hit me then, and it was touched on a little bit tonight. If a cattle feeder buys a set of calves and they do really, really good, they don't like to tell that rancher, because they don't want that rancher to go out and tell other cattle feeders. They want to buy them back the next year as cheap as they can. And that communication there kind of keeps me hush-hush. You know, there's a few out there. We got a good customer, he'll be here tomorrow, and I called him this fall about his calves. He says, oh, the guy that buys them some Brookings, and he's loving them, and he wants them back. This is great, keep selling to him, you know. Thanks again for coming, and